thank you all for joining and welcome to this Resilience Hub session titled Ensuring Water Security in the Global South. I'm Ellen, I'm the Sustainability Officer from AXA XL. AXA XL are the global property, casualty and specialty division of the global insurance company AXA. AXA XL's role as an insurer is to provide solutions to our clients' most complex risks, and as such, we believe we're well positioned to contribute to a more water secure world. We're proud to be sponsoring the Resilience Hub and facilitating this discussion with our fantastic speakers, who I will introduce shortly. Just to give you a bit of background on AXA XL, water is a fairly new focus for us, but one that we're really passionate about. As this audience will know, water is the primary medium through which we'll feel the effects of climate change, and it's going to be an issue that affects both developed and developing world countries. So water availability is becoming less predictable in many places, and the negative impacts of limited fresh water are numerous. Poor health, interrupted education, gender inequalities, conflict, unreliable food production, and many more. So ensuring that everyone has access to water is a critical component of mitigating climate change. In terms of the economic value of water, the CDP recently estimated that 2/3 of businesses have substantial water-related risks in their direct operations or value chain, and all industries rely on water to some degree. In 2020, CDP companies reported maximum financial impacts of water risks at $301 billion, which is 5 times higher than the cost of addressing those risks at $55 billion. So in nearly all sectors, the cost of action is less than the cost of inaction. Despite these statistics, we feel the importance of water is entirely underestimated and undervalued. And the role for us as an insurer is to help our clients and communities identify and manage their risks. So we believe that water risks are clearly something the world is underprepared for, and therefore something we should be addressing. So we're working on a few initiatives on the theme of water. This includes helping corporate water users manage their own risks and seize opportunities related to water, but also promoting long-term water security for all to protect against future risks. So we call these activities our Valuing Water initiatives, and they aim to highlight the value of water through evidence-based programming, with guidance from specialists in the water sector, as well as through client and colleague engagement. We also do some knowledge sharing and some network building between stakeholders as well. So we're in the early stages of our Valuing Water work, and there's much more we can and we would like to do. We're keen to learn from water experts through sessions like this to think about how we, but also, insurance more generally, can contribute to global water security and resilience efforts. So with that, let me introduce our speakers to get this session started. So I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Dr. Francesca O'Hanlon. Francesca is CEO and founder of BlueTap, a UK-based social enterprise that uses 3D printing to create accessible water purification technology. She has a background in working as a water, sanitation and hygiene engineer across the world, and she has just finished her PhD at the University of Cambridge, which looks at water security and climate resilience in the global south. Francesca is also working with AXA XL as our technical and strategic advisor on our Valuing Water initiatives. So as I said, Francesca will be moderating, and we have 3 further panelists who are going to tell you a little bit more about their work, starting with Claudia Time from AXA XL. Claudia is Director of Strategic Market Development at AXA XL. She promotes and drives the use of disaster risk finance and insurance to increase countries' resilience and protect their development gains. She has more than 20 years experience in the insurance industry, and she'll be talking about, quite broadly how insurance can protect populations in the global south. Then we'll hear from Rahel Diro. Rahel brings over a decade of experience in climate risk finance. She's worked in index insurance and forecast-based financing programs across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And her expertise includes climate change adaptation, food security, disaster risk reduction, access to finance, and impact investing. And then last but by no means least, we have Lucien Demiba. Lucian is the Regional Research and Knowledge Manager for WaterAid West Africa. He is an expert on water security and climate change with a particular focus on community resilience. Lucian also led the West Africa Regional Learning Centre for Water Resources Management from 2009 to 2018. So each speaker will speak for around 10 minutes on their topic, and then there'll be time for questions from the audience at the end. So with that, over to you, Francesca.
Thanks very much, Ellen. So I've been researching now this topic of water security for about 5 or 6 years. And it used to be that in the wash sector, we really only, the wash professionals, we really only spoke about water in terms of access. Is there enough water? But in the last 15 or 20 years, this term water security has become the predominant term to really describe the human relationship with water. And it's a relatively new framing, but what it identifies is that there are risks associated with how we consume water and how we interact with water in our everyday lives. Flooding, drought, contamination of water, climate change, conflict over water resources. These are all factors that are threatening current water access and are certainly going to threaten future water access. Water risks are often succinctly summarized as too much water, too little water, or water of poor quality. And particularly as we see the impacts of climate change begin to visibly affect water access, a key priority for the water and sanitation sector is to ensure that populations in the global south have access to enough water of good quality. And a key priority is to ensure that we can minimize these risks. Now, one mechanism to mitigate the impacts of these risks is insurance, but it's still a mechanism that is totally underutilized by populations that I've worked with in the global south and more broadly. So particularly when we look at too much water, flooding and extreme weather events, and the damage that this can do to property, to livelihoods, to the general quality of life, lower income populations just aren't really protected against these risks today. So why I'm really excited about tonight's speakers is because I think it gives audiences the opportunity to really understand a little bit more about the interaction between climate, insurance, and water. And it's not an interaction that's spoken about quite frequently. And so we've got together this panel of speakers who will tell us a little bit more about insurance, a little bit more about how insurance is being used today in various communities in the global south. So without much further hesitation, I'd like to introduce our first speaker from AXA XL, Claudia. She will be explaining a little bit about the insurance mechanisms and how insurance is being used today in the global south. Over to you, Claudia.
Sure. Thank you, Francesca, and hi, everybody. Good to be with you. If we move right to the first slide, Francesca, talking first about the lack of use of insurance in the global south, and we refer to that as what we call the protection gap. And just as a reference number, in 2020 there was a total of $190 billion of damage and losses from natural catastrophes worldwide. Of these, 81 billion were insured, of course, leaving us with a gap of $109 billion of uninsured losses. And we have to remember that behind these numbers, these are not just statistics, right? These are people being affected, their houses damaged, their roads not being repaired, livelihoods, and sometimes, of course, also lives lost. And the yearly average insurance gap for all losses, not just for natural disasters, is 145 billion for the 10-year average up to last year. So it's significant, and most of this gap, or a lot of it, is in developing countries because they use insurance less. And why? Some of the barriers are that there is still a limited risk understanding because of a limited access to risk analytics, really. We have this dichotomy that most of the investment in risk understanding and risk analytics is in the global north, but it's actually in the global south where it's most needed in those countries that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And without that understanding of risk, it's difficult for them to know where to prioritize investment for resilience and adaptation, and to attract capital, for example, for infrastructure, etc. Second, there is sometimes also a lack of an enabling environment. Just very quickly, the right regulation, the right measures in place that make it easier, for example, to use parametric insurance. And premium affordability, no question that after the pandemic, exactly those countries that are most vulnerable, that have less means, have had to take on debt to actually respond to the pandemic. And so they can much less now afford premium than before, which was already a challenge. But moving on to the question of what are the benefits of using insurance? And we have to remember that insurance represents pre-arranged finance to respond to a crisis, with the emphasis on the before the event happens, right? And today, if we think of humanitarian aid, 98% of the aid is not pre-arranged, which means that it takes a long time to come. And insurance in that way has a very important role in facilitating early action. Why is this important and how does it help? Because once a country understands what risk it faces and where they are, it can invest in early warning measures that actually help them to prepare and to plan to face a crisis, right? Nowadays, we can actually predict certainly droughts, but even with typhoons or hurricanes, we often have a few days warning. And knowing that funds will be available is actually what allows people to plan, to prepare, to ensure that survivors are safe, that they have access to food, water, and can better respond to crisis. Not only saves lives, but every $1 invested in early warning systems, for example, will represent $10 saved later in recovery. So extremely, extremely important. Second, it enables a faster recovery. I'll leave the numbers here with you, but generally countries or areas that have a higher insurance penetration can recover in an average of 1 year. Without insurance, it takes on average 4 years. Every 1% of insurance penetration in a country increases or actually reduces recovery times after a disaster by practically 1 year. So drives the recovery faster. And thirdly, the next point, Francesca, if we may, it protects national budgets and economies, right? If a country has to take on loans to address the impacts of a disaster, the debt levels increase. It means that it's more expensive for them to get money. And it becomes really a vicious downward spiral. But with insurance in place, as from the previous point, reconstruction can become faster, which creates new jobs, which in turn moves the economy, and this becomes a virtuous upward cycle. So really, if public services are not delivered, if infrastructure remains damaged, it can even get destroyed. So big difference between having or not having to be able to count on insurance. And then I think one more, Francesca, is that right? I was asked to comment very quickly on what insurance is doing about all this. We know, and we've been told by developing nations, that having access to risk analytics and risk information is of paramount importance to them. So AXA XL, with a series of scientific partners and as part of the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, just launched at COP26 the Coastal Risk Index, which will be able to be used by everyone, free. It's a public good, and it will show countries what coastal risk, so the risk of flood so sea level rise and storm surge in different levels of severity. And it will also show what is the difference of the impact of this with and without natural resources in place, like coral reefs, like mangroves, and not only what is the status today, but what is it for 2030 and 2050. So based on science, there are projections for these possible scenarios. Benefits, of course, is understanding where to invest, how to attract climate investments I've mentioned before. The second piece of work that we are doing is we signed a partnership with the V20, the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, which is actually 55 countries, to work with them to put in place something will be called the Global Risk Modeling Alliance, which will provide training and risk analytics for local teams. It will help them to develop risk models, and they will own those risk models. They will have open source access to the risk data on the models, and it will allow them to own that risk data and really that risk information. And really always the same benefits, right? Understanding risk, prioritizing investments, help attract investment. And finally, and these are just some of the examples of what the insurance industry is doing through the Insurance Development Forum, we have a program called the Tripartite, which is committed to deliver technical assistance and to design risk financing programs for 20 countries by 2025, including capacity development and $5 billion of offer risk capacity. The benefits are always the same. There's a lot to do, and we believe that it's not only insurance as a product, but the capabilities that insurers can bring and share and bring to bear in developing countries that need it the most, that can truly make a difference. Thank you, Francesca. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Claudia. What we'll do now is we'll move on to hear actually some examples of on-the-ground work of how insurance is actually now being used to build resilience for communities in sub-Saharan Africa, because I think it's fantastic to understand the theory behind it, but actually seeing it in implementation, hearing about it in action, that's also really interesting. So we'll move along now to Rahel Diro from Tetra Tech, and she's going to explain a little bit about how insurance has been used to build resilience in the Global South. Over to you, Rahel.
Thank you, Francesca, and hello, everyone. So just to say a little bit about myself, somewhat accidentally, most of my career has been spent working in risk financing across a variety of roles and in institutions. For example, I worked in program operations during my time with Oxfam America, and then I work on operational insurance product design and research at Columbia University's IRI, International Research Institute for Climate and Society. And now I work at Tetra Tech as a disaster risk finance associate, which allows me to take a wider perspective on program scaling. And over the last 10 years, I have been lucky to work with several programs that employ insurance solutions for resilience building. And I'm very excited to be here today on this panel to reflect on some of the things that I have noticed that makes these programs more impactful and scalable. So jumping into the first slide, for many farmers in the Global South who rely on rain-fed agriculture, climate change manifests itself through prolonged droughts or frequent floods that affect their agricultural productivity. So farmers would have to make a choice before the rainy season, and if they make the wrong choice, they risk losing everything. So this means that the little investments they have, be it in productivity enhancing technologies or in terms of hiring more laborers or hiring machinery, it's increasingly being wiped out because of extreme events. And this kind of affects their investment, their future investment into their productivity. And this deteriorates their future productivity and also kind of threatens their long-term food security. So one of the key ways that they can adopt is actually to relax the risk they face in hazardous years. So insurance kind of provides this opportunity to reduce their risk, which in the long run unlocks their productivity. So this is why, like the title of my slide is insurance is actually about the good years. So it's about protecting the good years, increasing your productivity in the good years. Next slide, please. So parametric insurance or weather index insurance is gaining momentum as it overcomes many of the challenges of indemnity insurance or traditional insurance. So in weather index insurance, payouts are calculated based on a threshold of a weather event. For example, it could be a rainfall event. So this means the insurers would not need to do loss adjustments, which results in cost savings. That means the insurer doesn't need to send their officers to the field in the event of a loss to assess the field, because it's based on a weather event. And from the insurance perspective, they also avoid what's called a moral hazard, in which which is a case when uninsured farmers avoid attending to their own farm because they bought insurance and they don't need to do too much effort into it, or what's referred as adverse selection, where only the farmers that have the highest risk would buy the insurance products. It could be like the farm that gets flooded all the time that would buy the insurance. So they will avoid this through parametric or weather-based insurance. Next slide, please. And there has been many examples of weather insurance products being used around the world, especially in the global south. And in practice, there is plenty of evidence showing how this kind of insurance program can have, big impact in terms of building resiliency of vulnerable people. R4 Rural Resilience Program is one of the example where insurance has led to meaningful social impact. In 2009, Oxfam America launched this pilot project in Ethiopia for the poorest farmers that integrated insurance, credit, and disaster risk reduction, building up on the Ethiopia Safety Nets program. And I was privileged enough to work on this project and also to proudly watch it grow into the World Food Program's R4 program. And to date, since 2011, there has been close to 2.9 million people that has been a part of this program or covered under this program. And it started in Ethiopia, but now it has scaled to 10 countries. Obviously, no program or no single initiative is perfect, but there are independent assessments that have shown that this program had a meaningful social impact. For example, in Ethiopia, farmers invested 50% of their payout into their farm, which, as I was saying before, it has implications on their future productivity. Insured farmers also had more savings compared to their uninsured neighbors. They were able to borrow 5 times more than their neighbors, their uninsured neighbors or non-participant farmers. Similarly, in Senegal, you also see big impact. Participants had a higher food consumption score. It was actually 4 times higher than non-participants. So food consumption score is a proxy measure for household food security. So there was a big impact there as well. In Malawi, the number of farmers resorting to negative coping strategies decreased by 50%. This is like when a drought or hits, farmers maybe take out their children out of school, and so on. These are negative coping strategies in general. And we have, through this program, there has been significant reduction in that. And there are other examples, including in pastoral livelihoods, where insurance has found to be very successful. For instance, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and also there is an example from Mongolia. Insured farmers have recovered faster after a shock compared to insured pastoralists recovered faster from a shock than uninsured pastoralists. Next slide, please. So working with programs over the years, I have found that there are some key elements that are critical for effectiveness of these programs on the ground, especially if we consider them as a mechanism for building resiliency of smallholders. The first one is obviously developing affordable products that address the specific risk and vulnerabilities of farmers. I want to underline affordable, which is very critical, but also, within a season, farmers, even within a single season, farmers have different vulnerabilities, For example, if you are a maize grower, you know, there are times of the season where you must have rainfall, otherwise your maize crop completely dies. So really understanding those vulnerabilities and tailoring the products to address those vulnerabilities is going to be very critical. And the other is ensuring the portfolio risk of the farm. Instead of just focusing on a single crop. As we know, smallholder farmers, especially in the global south, they don't rely on a single crop. They have they grow different kind of crops. So considering as we design these products, considering a portfolio approach would be very important. And also bundling financial products. It could be with other type of insurance products, for instance, crop and health insurance, or bundling different kind of financial products like insurance and credit. Or it could be, you know, bundling social programs and insurance, or linking social programs, social protection programs, for example, with insurance. These are also you know, one way of to make this program successful. And last but not least, I want to emphasize that participatory processes and mechanisms for meaningful engagement with the customer is very, very important. So starting from need assessment, product design, marketing and financial literacy trainings, claim processing, which there should be a mechanism to give a voice to the end clients. Next slide, please. The other is developing products that are robust and that could reliably provide the needed coverage. This is also very key. Basis risk is one of the main challenges in weather index insurance. Basis risk is a technical term to describe the mismatch between a weather event and an actual loss that's experienced. So because index insurance or weather index insurance relies on a weather event, maybe, you know, according to the rainfall measurement, there may be enough rain and, you know, the index would not trigger, but on the ground, there could be a huge loss. So this mismatch, when it happens, it's referred as basis risk. And you know, since we are dealing with insurance, historical data is key, both on the weather event, but also on the yield or on the impact side. These are key inputs for designing a weather index product. However, especially in you know, in the areas that we want to design insurance solutions, there is very limited data. There are very limited weather station networks. In the slide, what you see on the left, the image you see on the left shows the weather stations across Africa that report to the global telecommunication system. And if you see sub-Saharan Africa, there are very limited number of stations. And even those stations that exist, they are not reporting consistently. If you look at, you know, the figure in the middle, it's an example from Madagascar. Over time, you know, the number of reporting stations, the average number of reporting stations is decreasing. And if you look at the graph on the right, it's an example from Rwanda, and you can see a big drop during the conflict that happened there. And this research is from the IRI. So it can clearly demonstrate that there is you know, lack of data that we need to deal with as we think about weather index insurance products. And next slide, please. Fortunately, there has been a lot of progress in terms of Earth observation data sets or satellite remote sensing data sets. There are several type of data sets available, freely accessible and available that can be used for applications in weather index insurance. However, blind applications of these technologies is not feasible, especially in the global south, especially with small scale agriculture, because it often leads to substandard products and with substantial basis risk. A typical smallholder farm has many things. It has, you see from the image on the right, there are houses, there are shrubs, trees, different type of crops within the same farm, and also small sizes. And as if you look at like a typical commercial farm, it extends extensive area of land. More often than not, it's going to be one type of crop that's grown. So applications of remote sensing can be very straightforward in terms of commercial agriculture compared to small scale farming. So this makes ground truthing important. So you really need to check and verify on the ground different kind of information, and you need to validate the satellite data. And next slide, please. There is also substantial advances that are made in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and crop analytics over the past decade that could have huge potential to improve and further tailor insurance products. But this type of sophisticated models also require training data, and they need ground information to provide realistic representation of the conditions on the ground. And there is some promising effort toward this. For instance, Tetra Tech is currently implementing a project called Enabling Crop Analytics at Scale. This project aims to kind of catalyze the availability and uptake of agricultural both ground and remote sensing application in smallholder production systems. And this kind of effort will have a big implication to kind of close the information gap and help tailor insurance products, even to cover the unique context of a given farm. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the last piece, in my view, is also unlocking scale, which is like financing is very critical to unlock a scale. So, for instance, I also want to give some numbers, as Claudia did. A recent study estimates that less than 20% of smallholder farmers worldwide have access to agricultural insurance. So that leaves 80% of them uncovered. And if we look at the number closely in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, that leaves only 3% of smallholders in sub-Saharan Africa are covered. And in monetary terms, this coverage gap is estimated between 60 to 80 billion US dollar. In premium, in terms of annual premium, it's 8 to 15 billion dollars. So this closing this coverage gap is going to be very critical piece of the puzzle, especially if we are considering insurance solutions as one way of tackling the climate challenge and protecting investments of smallholders, whether directly protecting them or through some other like government program, like a social protection program. So this is going to be very critical. And from the supply perspective too, insurance require a critical mass to achieve a sustainable and viable business model. So unlocking this scale is a critical element of building the market, both from the supply perspective and also from the demand perspective. And obviously this will require a lot of public and private capital or investment. And this is not just to support insurers or the intermediaries or the different innovations that are being made in terms of product or producing innovative products, but also to support the scaling of this some of the successful programs. And next slide. So I guess just to give a few takeaways, and my first and biggest takeaway from like on conversation weather and agriculture insurance, that is that it is a big, complicated, and massively context specific. There is no silver bullet. And even like what success means depends on the context. For instance, the insurance that you develop for Kenya may not necessarily be the right one for a farmer in Ethiopia or Malawi and so on. So the most successful ways are insurance products. Like the key point I want to make is that the most successful ones put the needs of the clients first. They don't consider their clients as nameless customers or nameless beneficiaries. So instead, the impact, when they make huge impact, that comes from a very tailored approach, which gives their customers a voice. So participatory processes, demand-driven approaches are very critical. And also robust index design products. This more so relying on state-of-the-art remote sensing technologies, machine learning technologies, AI, and finally financing would be key to support scaling, both from the demand and the supply side. Thank you very much. I'll end my talk here.
Thank you very much, Rahel. That was really interesting. And I think you touched on a really good point there, which is maybe access to insurance will become wider as technology evolves, because you mentioned remote sensing and AI, and it will be interesting to see how, as that technology develops, it makes access easier. So I think that's something to look out for, actually. On the subject of data, we have our final speaker for tonight, Lucian from WaterAid. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about WaterAid's work in West Africa, but particularly how data is improving community understanding of water risk, and how that as a result is building community resilience to climate change. So Lucian, I'll hand over to you, our final speaker of the night.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'd like to share with you the role of data in improving community level understanding of water risk in West Africa based on our experience on the field. So, and as you may know, slide please. In West Africa, the climate crisis is water crisis. And since 1917, the rainfall is decreasing, so that the impact of climate change is on drinking water availability and quantity of water resources. So for the climate change, the predictions say that climate change will be stressing critically the water supply and services, and for most vulnerable people in West Africa. Next slide, please. So what's happened in the villages for the facing in climate change? We have three main things: the stress to water access and availability in quantity, the growing population also placing pressure on land and water resources, and the intermittent rainfall, growing local demand and limited reliable access to water point. And these are some impact on the ground, like the long queue, the conflict. So for us, in general, there is lack of operating principle to govern allocation and lack of procedures to manage risk of on the ground. Next slide. But the analysis shows us that the standard wash approaches don't adequately prepare community to manage ongoing stress to their water supplies. And we also notice that people remain vulnerable to changing water availability and competing demand. The strategies from standard wash approaches are very fragile, and people are out of reach of basin authority in charge of IWRN. So for ongoing stress, we think that monitoring these pressures locally could help communities to make decisions about managing their water. Next slide. And based on the water security definition we have developed, we come up with a security in the approach we call securing water resources. What does the water security mean for us in water aid, within water aid? After many reflection, we come up with this definition. The water security is reliable access to water of sufficient quantity and quality for basic human needs, small-scale livelihood, and local ecosystem, coupled with a well-managed risk of water-related disasters. So human is look how we can have enough water for multiple use locally, coupled with risk management. So based on that, the securing water resource approach is a kind of activities in relationship to improve local water resource management and also to enhance resilience to stress at local level, like environmental degradation and climate variability. Next slide, please. This approach combines a service of water delivery and action to strengthen resilience to ongoing stress, likely to impact health and livelihood. Next slide. So the logic of this approach is coming into 5 main steps: perceiving the risk, monitoring the stress, taking action based on the data you have collected to better manage the water resources or to provide better service of wash, and finally to reduce the risk, the risk identified at the beginning. So this leads to supporting community to identify stress in their water security, in develop the capacity to manage those stress. And we developed a lot of materials to support the community to own the approach, how to perceive the stress, how to monitor, and also how to take action to reduce the risk. And we have a toolkit fully developed for that purposes. But to achieve this, we need to engage local government, to have the support of national and sub-national or even district level engagement to support community to better understand, even for the researchers, because starting for what we are coming from, with working with illiterate people, and the perception are people don't have enough capacity to understand the water cycle, water crisis, and scientific things. But we need a strong engagement of community, of national and sub-national institutions, support them to better understand, to be able to be more resilient and reduce the risk they are facing. Next slide, please. So how this approach works is based on four main steps, using simple tools we have developed for community to understand the stress, identify the stress, understand them, prioritize them, and go for the monitoring. And monitoring also is using simple tools they can understand, like the water whistle, deep meters, rain gauge, water meters, to collect data to better understand the risk. And then to be able to understand this risk, they have to interpret the data based on what they have collected: groundwater, rainfall, water abstractions, water runoff, and so on and so forth, to better understand, and then share this information, based on what the data showed, at the community assembly, as well as national level and district level, to see what the risks are, where the risks are. Is it for groundwater level? Is it for agricultural purposes? Is it for environmental purposes? To better understand the risk before taking action to improve or to reduce the risk. Next slide, please. So based on the quality of the data and the interpretation they made, supported by local government, national agencies, as well as water aid staffs, they are better to make decision to improve water management. And somehow they are agreeing allocation for different users, water users, agreeing time for different users, rationing water, etc., etc. And then they can also improve the wash services by designing new infrastructures or taking action to invest in domestic use of in harvesting rainwater, for instance, and bringing about total sanitation to eliminate fecal contamination. And those improvements are based mainly on what the data have shown to them, and what the risks are, the level of the risk is, and this allow them to take actions to be better, more resilient, and have adaptive capacity to face on climate risk or water security, water insecurity risk in the area. Next slide, please. And there are also some key what the data could help also is the better accountability. Before community gets this data to know the level of risk they are facing, they couldn't advocate for themselves. For now, having this data, they add the weight to the voice to call for better services, or even for better water management in the region. There can also, we have the opportunity to enhance the knowledge of local climate and impact of water resources. There are no strong database at local, district, and national and subnational level, so that they can use all the stakeholders are using it to improve the planning as climate planning or water resource management side. So and now we have in most of the community we are working in, they are embedding now climate data in the local planning. They have local planning, they have local plans, including water security planning at local level, taking into consideration the risk management of climate and other stress they are facing. And finally, they are strengthening community adaptive capacity, because the better knowledge of this risk in terms of decreasing of rainfall, the decrease of water table, and so on and so forth, could help them to better better adapt themselves to what will be happening based on the data they have collected. And finally, this also help them to strengthen the community-based adaptation measures based on what they have said. So to conclude on this usefulness of data, we can say that data is key to short-term, medium, and long-term forecasting, coupled with risk assessment to develop projection of water security, so that people adaptive capacity, resilience framework, and future resilience wash technology can be developed. And we can see, since we are working with them, a lot of things are ongoing, and people are more comfortable to face the water shortage or the other climate-related risk to the community, in their communities. Next. So, next slide. So, what is the impact of local level or the achievement we have reached? So, at community level, we can see the improvement of community organizational framework. For now, we have a network of more than 300 community water monitors within across West Africa's region. What is new, because we are now local expertise, and other NGOs are using the capacity, the expertise to work on water security and without water aid. That is something emerging, is very important for us. And we have also some sub-communities in some countries. And we also have, for now, a lot of data, let's say of local database for groundwater and rainfall, as well as abstraction in these communities. And we have also developing the culture of accountability, because these communities are now organize themselves to be accountable to the local assembly, but also within themselves, within the community members, the community monitors inform the data, what the data show to the entire community, and the shared decision they made is applied to everyone. And that is not before. They don't have this kind of framework in the village. And also we can see how women are empowered, because now women are organized in women groups to work on to get market gardening, and also call for capacity building. And for now, women are in front line of this data collection in the areas, and because they can see the advantage they have and how they can more have they can face the lack of water during the 8 to 8 month dry season time, where water or the water table is decreasing. So they are now the one taking care of this, and based on how they are empowered. And also local ecosystems are now better protected through some technology like sand dams, stone bonds, to increase the shallow water table to make water available for market gardening and other purposes, and as well as the protection of water buffer zone and river bank. So people are now aware that they can take their own responsibility to face on the climate risk based on the data they have collected, rather than waiting for somebody coming from elsewhere to support them, as it was at the beginning. And we can also see the construction of new boreholes to help with solar systems. That is new. Before they are asking for engine with fuel to use, but now they are now aware that climate change is affecting water cycle, so they need to take care of it, and taking some more information and for more decision to face on that. Next slide, please. And at national level and district level, we also see the improvement of district level planning. And in Ghana, Burkina, in Niger, for instance, and Mali, well, most of the districts we are working in have now the data base on groundwater and rainfall to better understand since 10 years now, or 11 years now. And based on this data they have, and the analysis they have done, they have embedded the water security planning in artistic level planning now, what is new. And so that the sector is now, the water sector is now strengthened based on these data collected over the years. And we have also district prevention plans and capacity building, are also the mayors themselves and their staff received a kind of capacity building using new tools they never use. At national, in Mali, for instance, the government, national government are using the data loggers, the automatic one, to construct the network, replacing the manual one with that one. That is new. And Burkina also, government also start discussing with us to see how they can be provided with this equipment to replace the network, to have a fully strong data to better understand groundwater and let's say hydroclimate data in the country. And one of the important things also, we are improving the collaboration between government agencies. With this work, calling for their kind of collaboration now with Meteorological Met's Office, Water Resource, Agriculture, Environment Watch, so that they are working together to support communities and also understand the need of communities. And one of the examples is, for now, the agricultural services are now going to the communities to get data for the planning. Before, it was the government agricultural services we provide data to people. Now they are going to speak to communities to own data for their planning. So yeah, though they are now available of climate data in these areas, so that people can easily plan, the NGOs and other stakeholders can easily plan using this data, strong data community are collected. Next slide, please. So the key message and recommendation is the water security predicted to intensify and strengthen economic stability and human development, mainly in poor countries. So climate change makes rainfall less predictable and flooding more likely. The need to reach everyone everywhere, SDG 6, will be difficult, and it's not more urgent than ever to act. Data could help to address climate challenge, and we saw just talk about it, and build community adaptive capacity and resilience. Is essential also to combat climate crisis if data is available. And one of the challenges in West Africa here is the lack of data. And we can see that the example I've shown with you, that this support and help combating climate crisis in terms of resilience building and adaptive capacity. Lack of data, climate data lead to water insecurity, water poverty, and also what we call climate poverty. We cannot adapt to climate crisis without lack of knowledge on climate, including data. So to support community with climate data collection, they can use them to demand for better services. And my key recommendation will, the last slide, we need to improve climate resilience adaptive capacity to extreme water-related disasters through risk and emergency management solutions. We also need to raise community awareness about risk and strengthening climate-based adaptation program at all levels by 2013 if we want to reach the SDG 6, everyone, everywhere. And we also need to have the improvement of institutional cooperation across departments to recognize water, sanitation, and hygiene as essential in climate change adaptation, including it in policies and strategies at national level, as well as local level. Finally, prioritize community empowerment, including data gathering, analysis, and uses as critical to build community adaptive capacity and resilience. Community in West Africa are illiterate, most of them, but this experience shows that they are able to own the process to collect data and strong data for adaptation and climate adaptation. And we are now using this data at university level with PhD student or master student. That shows that data is essential to understand. And now instead of using global or regional models, we are also constructing now local models to better understand climate and also build resilience to. So data is key, and community could be very supportive for that. We need to work on that and empower them to be able to use it. Thank you very much. That's I wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much, Lucian. That was fascinating. I think it's really interesting to see that, showing how data can actually be used, and how what Rahel was saying about some of the products and the technologies that Tetra Tech are working on, we can see that trickle down to how they can eventually get used by the communities that need them. with the help of, like you say, it really requires a collaboration of institutions and organizations like WaterAid. So it's really fascinating to see the links behind all the actors working on this problem. And we're going to jump to a few questions now for our speakers. So I'd like to jump in actually with one for Claudia, because going back to our initial framing, Rahel and Claudia both focus on the fact that, less than 20% of farmers have actually are using insurance products. So it's not really that much. And we know that it can benefit them more. Claudia, so what are these barriers to the adoption of insurance in the global south? Not just for farmers, but generally for populations. What are the barriers?
If particularly, lack of data, as our colleague was highlighting and I had mentioned, and that can stand at the top of the government level, that if they don't know where the issues are, they don't know where to prioritize. But premium affordability is a huge issue, which is why one of the things we're doing as insurers, apart from having these different efforts I mentioned, to not only take this global data and share it, but actually exactly what Lucien was talking about, empower local people to collect and use their own data and understand their risk. That is absolutely critical. But on premium affordability, we are also very much pushing the discussion of the need for certain countries to have premium support, and there are all sorts of different, there are donor countries, but also other organizations that need to consider this. And also in relation to that, the making it also easier and more transparent for countries that need the support, that need to be able to use insurance among other tools, to know where to go. We have a very complex infrastructure. There's the Insurance Development Forum, there's the Green Fund, there's this and the others. I just came back from COP26 and I was talking to a minister from a developing country, and she was telling me, the number of organizations and acronyms is absolutely mind-boggling and very overwhelming. So I think that there are a lot of different issues, but data is absolutely central, and we're making a big effort to make not only data, but access to the risk analytics capabilities available in developing countries where it is needed most. I think that's an absolutely central issue.
Yeah, and I think that data has to come with capacity building as well, because there's, you can often say there's no point in data for data's self. People have to understand how to use it as well.
Yes.
And we've mentioned today that achieving what we're trying to achieve, getting more people access to insurance, will require multiple stakeholders. And you've spoken a little bit about governments, but what are the benefits of governments using insurance to protect their populations, and how can governments, how can they play their role in this?
Well, the benefit to governments is that they have a more predictable spend, right? Because typically governments will usually create a certain fund, right, that is available to face disasters. But if you have a major disaster, that fund will likely, particularly if you're a small developing country facing a lot of risk, that those own funds will not be enough, which means that you then need to rely on humanitarian aid. And because humanitarian aid is not pre-arranged, the Center for Development for Disaster Protection actually calls it, go around with the ball collecting money, because it's really literally talking to the World Bank, talking to the donor countries to get that money in. And the earliest it often arrives in a country is after 6 months after a disaster happens, right? And if you think of a whole community that has been underwater, if those houses or those brick factories, wherever it might be, are not fixed quickly, they're going to be even more damage than if they are repaired and reconstructed, maybe a month after the disaster took place, or hospitals or roads. So the benefit is, A, reconstruction can happen faster, but B, governments also can protect their own balance sheets, right? Because often when that humanitarian aid doesn't come off quickly enough, they will take on loans. And when they take on loans, and their debt level increases, it means, first of all, they're using funds that they would have otherwise have earmarked for constructing new schools or building more hospitals, generally in development, but also they increase their debt levels. And that means that next time they need money, for example, for development, it will cost them even more to have access to those loans. That is the terrible dichotomy right now, that the countries that need funding most are the ones that have the most difficulty and that have to pay the most to actually have access to the funds. So it's a lot to be addressed.
Yeah, and also you see when there's not that access to the funds after disasters, you have disasters that follow the disasters, like the cholera outbreak after Haiti, and I've seen that so many times. Is that's you know, being able to move quickly actually prevents the secondary disasters, which are often more fatal than the initial ones.
Right, and the other thing is, Francesca, if I may add something, because actually Rahel was talking about parametric insurance, and you know, clearly today we're able to know when certain events will strike before they really happen, particularly drought. And so it means not only that you can respond faster after a disaster happens, but you can respond before an event fully sets on, right? If farmers can receive funds, and in studies show that actually providing funds directly to people affected, that you know will be affected, like smallholder farmers, is what helps most, right? And Rahel showed it in many of her examples, that people, you know, had access to food. Often then people can save their animals rather than losing them. So there is so much that can be done if we have access to data, and particularly early warning. It's really important. Early warning of events that are coming their way actually allows for early action, allows for planning, for people to be better prepared and to respond quicker, even before events happen.
Mm-hmm. And Rahel, what do you think about, you know, you spoke a lot about rural farmers, but what do you think lack of awareness of the availability of insurance products? Do you think that's one of the barriers that's limiting farmers' access to insurance? And if so, how can we improve that awareness? How can you get the message out there better? Because certainly with some populations I've worked with, like the insurance isn't really even a mechanism that comes up as an option to protect yourself against risks.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. I mean, as I was alluding to in my presentation, there is still a huge unmet demand, and I would have to agree with Claudia, and also from my experience, the supply side constraints are still big. There are several constraints, including like developing affordable products, you know, what kind of distribution channels you use, what kind of products you use. All these are still like not fully solved. So I would say the supply is still thin. So I, at least in my experience, I wouldn't say that it's not like, you know, the product being there and farmers not knowing about it. That's a huge or like, you know, the reason why there is still such a big unmet demand. So I think the supply is still small. Of course, there are issues of awareness. You know, we are also dealing with communities that have very little understanding of financial products. So you still need to do a lot of financial literacy trainings. Insurance is also, you know, it's a product that's based on trust, right? You are saying, give me money and, you know, I'll give you a payout when something happens. So that requires a lot of trust to pay in advance. Yeah. So obviously there is a lot of financial education and training that needs to happen. But I would say that's not where the biggest challenge is at the moment. I think the biggest challenge is still the supply is very low. And as I was saying, there are a lot of experience out there that we can learn from and we can scale, including in terms of data availability, or in terms of like how we can link this insurance solution to different kind of government programs. It could be social protection programs that the government can adopt, or link these programs with insurance. So there are different kind of lessons out there that can be used to kind of reach a bigger number of people. But I would still say that, like, yeah, from the supply side constraints are still unsolved.
Yeah, interesting. Lucian, we've had a question come in here, and I think it's best directed at you. It's a question about community empowerment. So, with your experience of working with communities in West Africa, how much ownership do they have in developing their resilience strategies, and how much is it driven by WaterAid? So, what's that relationship like when you're developing strategies to build climate resilience? Is it the communities that come to you and ask for support, or how does WaterAid work with those communities?
Yeah, thank you. Let's say we start this work in 2011, and we start with developing tools to empower community to understand what is the kind of the relationship between climate variability and how do you call it, and water cycle, and they can make this link and have this kind of understanding, and then we start developing pilot plans with them based on the data they have collected, and step by step they own the process, and they now have they don't need WaterAid at all. For example, since we have left there in 5 years now from now, they're still collecting data and have their own plans. Sometimes there's something missing. Okay, they just call WaterAid for clarification, or local government or national agencies for clarification. So for now, they completely own the process. And what we are doing now with we have some let's say some interaction with them, not as a project, but taking this the next step for this work. For instance, linking the let's say helping them to understand, to make the relationship with between the data they have collected, the rain amount of the rain trend over the year, and the crop yield, to see if there are some correlation with them. So we are taking these steps now, so that they will be including it in their plan. But for now, since 5 or 6 years, they own all the process and they're working, and rarely they are coming to us for support. So they are now better, because the community monitors are working as a network, so they can support each other to run the process.
Yeah. And that's the best way to run it, isn't it? When the communities themselves have ownership, it's much more likely to last over the long time, and protect them for future risks. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with one final question, because in a questions discussion we've mentioned a variety of stakeholders, but the final one is the insurance sector. So Claudia, for you, what is the insurance industry actually doing to facilitate the use of insurance in developing countries? Is this something the insurance sector is interested in?
There is a lot that we are doing, but I think that because we have recognized that access to data and risk analytics capabilities is so central, we are putting a lot of efforts into that. And in fact, this week at COP, I mentioned 2 things already: the Coastal Risk Index that was launched, and this is something we very much led as AXA working with scientific partners. But there was also something called the Global Resilience Index Initiative that was also actually being launched today at COP, and that is to give more of a high level view on risk, but globally, because the other thing that we know will be needed, and Lucian very much talked about, everybody used to be talking only about reducing greenhouse gases and mitigation, and we now know that we need to help countries to adapt to the amount of climate change that is already happening and that is coming our way. And part of that is also, for example, building climate resilience infrastructure, retrofitting schools. All of that costs money, and I think the funds are being found, and that's the part of the discussion that is taking place in Glasgow right now. But also to know where to invest, where is it most needed, where is it needed more quickly, what is needed. We need this data. So the Global Resilience Index Initiative, and in addition, what I mentioned, which I think is really will be an excellent program, is the Global Risk Modeling Alliance, because it is focused, as you said, not in just providing data, but providing the risk analytics capability, training people locally to work with the data to develop their own models and to own the risk information. So that's central, I would say.
Absolutely. I think you make a really good point there about adaptation. I mean, there's so much discussion about mitigation, but it's not defeatist to say that adaptation is going to be essential. And I really think it's where the focus should stay.
Yes.
Unless we have any more questions in the chat, which I'm just looking at and we don't seem to, I'm going to wrap up there so we can give our speakers an opportunity to rest, finishing from their talk. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers. I found it absolutely fascinating. I hope the audience has as well. I'd like to thank Ellen and AXA XL. Ellen, are you happy for us to wrap up now?
Yeah, thanks, Francesca. And just to second your comments, to say thank you so much to all of our speakers and for sharing some updates on their work. It's been great to have you, and really pleased we could be a part of the Resilience Hub. So this session has been recorded and we'll make it available on that Resilience Hub website too. So thank you all for your participation.